Most people spend their entire lives believing one idea that quietly destroys their purpose. I need a job to survive. They repeat it until it becomes a personal truth, even though deep down they feel trapped, exhausted, and disconnected from the life God intended for them. The system taught them to worship stability instead of wisdom, and to fear uncertainty instead of trusting the one who provides. But what if the belief keeping them safe is the same belief keeping them small? The uncomfortable reality is this: the world benefits when people stay predictable. Schools train obedience, jobs demand dependence, and society celebrates survival, not purpose. The Bible, however, points in the opposite direction. God gave his children creativity, strategy, and the power to build, not to simply follow orders. Yet so many believers trade their calling for a paycheck, never realizing they've surrendered their identity in the process. It's not that work is wrong, it's that dependence is dangerous. If someone feels overwhelmed by money, burned out by work, or terrified of losing their income, it's not because they're weak. It's because they were never taught how God's economy works. They were taught to climb ladders, not build foundations. They were taught to chase job titles, not pursue wisdom. And while the system tells them to wait for permission to make money, Scripture tells them they can create, innovate, and prosper with God's guidance. If you like our content, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. What if the life they've been living isn't the life God designed, but the life the system assigned? And what if the Bible has been holding the blueprint for financial freedom, purpose, and resilience all along? Today's message will reveal why breaking out of the job-dependent mindset isn't rebellion, it's obedience. And once someone sees the truth, they can't unsee it. Let's begin. The system designed your life, but God designed your freedom. Many people grow up believing that the only path to survival is to accept whatever the system assigns to them. From childhood through adulthood, they're trained to follow orders, not to design their own path. Yet, in Scripture, God never called anyone to live as a passive follower of man-made structures. He called people to steward, to rule, to multiply, not to merely clock in and out. This is the foundational tension. The world designs control, but God designs freedom. When someone enters the school-to-job pipeline, something subtle happens inside them. Creativity gets compressed, imagination dries up, and independence gets replaced with quiet obedience. It's not accidental. Systems love predictable people, but in Genesis, God entrusted humanity with dominion, not dependency. Dominion isn't about ego. It's about using wisdom, skill, and courage to build something meaningful, even if that involves money, business, and opportunities to make money in ways the world can't dictate. The Bible repeatedly challenges the believer to think, discern, and act with spiritual intelligence. Romans 12:2 makes it clear: do not conform to the pattern of this world. Yet most people unknowingly conform to a pattern that crushes purpose. They work jobs assigned to them, life schedules assigned to them, and pursue dreams assigned by cultural expectations. God's call is radically different. He invites the believer to renew their mind and rediscover their divine capacity to create. The system loves routine because routine keeps people controllable, tired, and too distracted to build something of their own. But God consistently called his people out of oppressive structures, from Egypt to Babylon, and into environments where they could think, build, and flourish. Believers often forget that divine wisdom has always been a blueprint for prosperity. Proverbs 24:3 says, "By wisdom a house is built, not by survival, not by a wage, by wisdom." When a person begins to recognize this difference, something shifts inside their spirit. They start noticing how much of their life was never chosen, only inherited. Salary expectations, career choices, lifestyle rhythms. Even their definition of security came from a world that profits when people stop thinking. But God profits when his children think boldly. That's why Scripture highlights people like Joseph, Daniel, Lydia, and Solomon, individuals who use divine insight to influence economies, run business well, and make money with intention. And once a person realizes their life was never meant to be assigned, a quiet hunger begins to grow. They feel an urge to break out of the mold, think independently, and seek God's plan instead of society's. That's usually the moment they begin questioning the very thing the world told them to depend on. And that's exactly where the next topic begins, when work stops being a responsibility and becomes a prison of identity. When work becomes identity, the trap of depending on a paycheck. Most people never notice when work stops being something they do and quietly becomes something they are. It happens slowly, almost silently. A job title becomes self-worth. A salary becomes a measure of value. And before they realize it, their entire identity is tied to a paycheck that can disappear in a single corporate email. Yet Scripture warns against this illusion. Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man." Trusting a company more than God is a modern form of bondage. Depending emotionally on a paycheck creates a false sense of security. It tells a person, without this job, you are nothing. That's why so many people tolerate environments that drain them, because the fear of losing the salary is greater than the desire to live freely. But God never designed anyone to live paralyzed by fear. He created work to be honorable, not enslaving. Healthy work builds character. Unhealthy dependence destroys identity. When the paycheck becomes the source, people stop thinking creatively. They stop taking risks. They stop dreaming. Everything becomes about survival. And survival mode is spiritually dangerous. It narrows vision, kills initiative, and blinds a person to opportunities God places in front of them. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24 that no one can serve two masters. When someone serves fear of losing money, they cannot walk in the boldness God intended for their business, purpose, or ability to make money with freedom. You can always recognize when someone is trapped in paycheck identity. They defend their job even when it harms them. They justify burnout as responsibility. They confuse exhaustion with productivity. And most importantly, they forget that provision is God's job, not their employer's. Psalm 121 reminds us that our help comes from the Lord, not from corporate structures that replace people the moment profit margins shift. The Bible gives countless examples of people who refuse to allow their work to define them. Daniel worked for empires, but the empires never owned him. Joseph rose in systems, but his identity stayed rooted in God's vision. Lydia ran a thriving business but kept her heart aligned with the kingdom. These individuals didn't let titles limit them. They carried purpose into everything they did. They made money through wisdom, not through dependency. And it's exactly when someone begins breaking this emotional attachment to a paycheck that a new question surfaces. If my job is not my provider, then who is? That question leads directly into the next topic, where the Bible reveals the true source of provision and the difference between God's economy and the world's fragile systems. Why your job is not your provider. God's economy versus man's economy. Most people grow up believing that their employer is their provider. The paycheck becomes the ultimate lifeline, and the company becomes the place where they believe their safety is guaranteed. But biblically, that's not true. God is very clear about the source of provision. Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "It is He who gives you the power to get wealth, not a corporation, not a salary." God's economy operates on faith, wisdom, and obedience, not on fear and dependency. In man's economy, everything is fragile. One downturn, one merger, one change in leadership, and a person's income can disappear overnight. That's why people feel constant anxiety around money. They are tied to a system that can collapse at any moment. But in God's economy, provision comes from His ideas, His guidance, and His direction. The Bible is full of individuals who prospered not because a system favored them, but because God gave them strategy, creativity, and insight. When someone begins to understand this shift, they start seeing money differently. Instead of chasing it anxiously, they begin managing it with purpose. Instead of fearing loss, they start trusting the one who multiplies. This mindset changes everything in business as well. Suddenly, make money stops being an act of desperation and becomes an act of stewardship. That's why Proverbs 3:5 and 6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart, because financial direction flows from spiritual alignment. One of the most powerful examples of God's economy is Joseph. Egypt was collapsing into famine, a total economic crisis. But Joseph prospered because God gave him strategy. He wasn't relying on Pharaoh's salary, he was relying on divine wisdom. The same pattern repeats with Abraham, Isaac, Solomon, and the apostles who built communities capable of sustaining themselves even under persecution. God's provision always transcends man-made systems. Practically speaking, when someone operates in God's economy, they begin seeing opportunities that others overlook. They sense ideas others fear. They build small streams of income that later become rivers of prosperity. They understand that a job may be a resource, but never the source. Resources change. God doesn't. This is where believers often begin stepping out of survival mode and into creativity, courage, and financial clarity. And once someone grasps that their job is not their provider, a deeper transformation begins. They start questioning the beliefs they inherited from family, school, and society. They start recognizing how much fear shaped their decisions, and they realize that breaking these beliefs is essential. Which leads directly to the next topic, renewing the mind about money, risk, calling, and the invisible chains that keep people stuck. Breaking the chains. Renewing your mind about money, risk, and calling. Every financial breakthrough begins in the mind long before it appears in the bank account. People grow up hearing phrases like, money is dangerous, business is risky, rich people are greedy, and just be grateful for what you have. These ideas may sound humble, but they quietly sabotage purpose. Romans 12:2 teaches that transformation starts with renewing the mind. Without a new mindset, even God-inspired opportunities are ignored, feared, or mismanaged. Many people think they're being responsible when, in truth, they're being controlled by inherited fear. Their parents feared losing money, so they fear taking risks. Their grandparents feared financial instability, so they cling desperately to one income source. But faith requires courage. The parable of the talents shows that the servant who hid his gift was not called humble. He was called wicked and lazy. Playing it safe is not biblical stewardship. Renewing the mind means questioning everything the system taught about money. It means understanding that risk is not the enemy, ignorance is. When someone studies, learns skills, understands markets, and aligns their decisions with biblical principles, risk becomes manageable. That's why Proverbs 4:7 says, wisdom is the principal thing. Wisdom reduces fear. Wisdom increases discernment. Wisdom opens doors to make money without losing peace. One practical way to renew the mind is through exposure. When someone begins spending time with people who think differently, entrepreneurs, investors, kingdom builders, their internal ceiling gets raised. They hear new ideas, see new models of business, and realize that the world is filled with opportunity. Most believers don't lack calling, they lack exposure. Surrounding yourself with people who are building something forces your mind to expand beyond survival. Another way is through education guided by Scripture. Reading books about wealth building, studying Proverbs like a financial manual, listening to people who actually make money ethically, all of this rewires the mental framework. It shapes a believer who stops asking, what if it goes wrong? And starts asking, what if God is trying to grow me through this? That's the shift from fear-based living to faith-based building, and it impacts every financial choice. But once the mind begins changing, a new awareness arises. If I'm not trapped anymore, what can I actually build? That question becomes the spark for creativity, initiative, and income generation aligned with God's wisdom. And that takes us directly into the next topic, discovering how a person can build income outside the system using gifts, strategy, and biblical understanding. You can build income outside the system, creativity, wisdom, and biblical strategy. One of the biggest lies society teaches is that income only comes from a traditional job. Biblically, this was never true. God gave his people creativity, skill, and insight to produce value wherever they went. In Exodus 31, Bezalel was filled with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of craftsmanship, gifts that allowed him to build something meaningful and profitable. Income has always been tied to God-given ability, not institutional permission. Today, the average person sits on untapped knowledge they don't even recognize as valuable. Their life experience, professional background, spiritual gifts, hobbies, struggles, and victories can all be converted into streams of income. Teaching, consulting, digital products, writing, crafting, online services. These are accessible paths to make money that don't require gatekeepers. In a world where AI and social media give global reach, the potential to build a small business is bigger than ever. Think about the widow in 2 Kings 4. She was drowning in debt, overwhelmed, and convinced she had nothing. But the prophet asked her, "What do you have in your house?" The miracle came not from something external, but from what she already possessed. This is the blueprint for modern believers. Look at what God already placed in your hands. Skills, time, perspective, creativity. These are the raw materials of financial breakthrough. When someone begins to recognize this, the pressure of depending on one salary starts to fade. They realize that multiple streams of income aren't a luxury, they are biblical wisdom. Ecclesiastes 11:2 advises diversifying because uncertainty is part of life. That's exactly what kingdom entrepreneurs do. They build small, sustainable income flows that grow over time. They learn marketing, they study basics of business, and they treat money not as a master but as a tool. And the beauty is this: you don't need perfection to start. You need willingness. A simple digital skill can become a freelance service. A life lesson can become a mini course. A passion for design can become an online shop. A strong spiritual insight can become a devotional or mentorship. God never demanded flawless execution. He blesses movement. When someone moves, He multiplies. When someone hides, nothing happens. But as believers start exploring these possibilities, one crucial truth becomes unavoidable. Depending on a job alone is not stability, it is risk. The world is shifting, opportunities are expanding, and God is opening doors for those who are willing to step beyond fear. And that leads directly into the next topic, where we confront the surprising reality that a job may be far riskier than building something small, modern, and guided by divine wisdom. A job is riskier than building something with God. Understanding modern opportunity. One of the most surprising financial truths today is that depending on a salary has become far riskier than building a small, modern business with God's guidance. The world is changing fast. Companies automate, restructure, downsize, and replace people without hesitation. Proverbs 27:1 warns us, "You do not know what a day may bring." That verse hits differently when your entire future depends on a single paycheck someone else controls. Many people believe entrepreneurship is risky, but in reality, the riskiest thing is having only one stream of income. It's like standing on one leg for your entire life. The slightest push can make you fall. That's exactly what happens to those who rely on one job. But when someone creates even a small side stream of money, they gain stability and confidence. They begin seeing that they can make money proactively instead of waiting passively for approval from a company. Scripture reinforces this idea. Ecclesiastes 11:6 encourages sowing seeds in the morning and in the evening, not knowing which one will prosper. That's diversification, the same principle used by the wealthy today. It's the difference between surviving on a fragile paycheck and creating opportunities through wisdom, skill, and creativity. God never intended His people to be dependent. He intended them to be fruitful. Technology has removed most of the barriers that once made business difficult. With AI, digital platforms, online marketplaces, and social media, a person can start something meaningful with almost no capital. This wasn't normal decades ago, but today it is. And it aligns perfectly with how God equips His people. Joseph used systems, Solomon used trade, Paul used letters. Today, believers can use digital tools with the same kingdom mindset. But the real transformation happens internally. When someone builds something with God, even if it starts small, their identity shifts. They no longer see themselves as trapped by employers, schedules, or limitations. They become adaptable, spiritually grounded, and resilient. They recognize that provision does not flow from a payroll department. It flows from God Himself, who blesses courage, wisdom, and initiative. And once a person realizes that building something with God is not only possible but actually safer than depending on a salary, a new hunger awakens. They begin dreaming differently. They begin planning differently. And they begin asking a powerful question that leads directly to the next phase. If this is true, how do I align my entire life, mindset, money, work, and calling with God's design instead of the system? Everything you heard in this message leads to one central truth. God never intended you to build your entire life on a foundation that can be taken from you in a single moment. He designed you to operate from wisdom, freedom, and purpose, not fear, exhaustion, or dependence. The moment you realize that a job is a tool, not an identity, you begin taking back the authority the system quietly stole from you. But now the question is, what will you do with this truth? Will you continue letting the world define how high you can go, how much money you can make, and what kind of business you're allowed to build? Or will you finally step into the life God designed for you? A life where creativity isn't punished, courage isn't mocked, and income isn't limited by someone else's permission. Ask yourself, what dream have you been ignoring because you believed you needed your job? What idea has been sitting inside you that could help you make money with wisdom instead of fear? What skills, gifts, or experiences has God placed in your hands that you've been underestimating? And the most important question, if you already know the truth, what are you still waiting for? Write in the comments, "I will make money with wisdom in Jesus' mighty name." And watch how this powerful declaration begins to shift the course of your business and your finances from this day forward. You have everything you need to begin. God has already placed seeds of creativity, strategy, and strength inside you. You don't need to quit your job tomorrow. You need to stop surrendering your purpose to fear. The moment you take one step toward building something with God, He multiplies that step into a path. If this message touched you in any way, consider supporting our ministry through the link in the description. And make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications so you don't miss any of the teachings that will guide you into the financial freedom God already planned for you.